I think it's the height of irresponsibility that our public health officials didn't have a press conference and say, we've got some updated information. If you're not over 80 years old, 70 years old, and you don't have serious comorbidities, and you're not from Wuhan in the months when we first discovered this virus, you're probably going to be just fine. They never said that. They also did way too much of the high-pressure, protocol-driven ventilator. There were people that were talking and walking and said, we got to get you on a ventilator right now. Why? I'm fine. Medical errors were the third leading cause of death up until 2019. Misdiagnosis of COVID and mistreatment of people that didn't have COVID and killing them on ventilators or killing them because they developed bacterial pneumonia, sepsis, and all the rest has made medical error the number one cause of death in the United States.
Who would have known that the number one and the number two leading cause of death in the industrialized world, cancer and heart disease, that the solution for those two disease processes was COVID? Because nobody's dying of heart disease and cancer anymore. It's all COVID. Testing doesn't mean that you have a problem. In fact, the PCR test was developed by a doctor by the name of Kerry Mullis, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his development of the PCR test. Kerry Mullis himself said you cannot use it to diagnose an infectious process or a pathogenic issue. It's picking up a signature, that's all. If you amplify the test enough, everybody's going to test positive for it.
Welcome to episode 7 of Vaccines Revealed COVID Edition. What a series this is. And we're not done yet. We've got a few more episodes to go. This episode is something that I believe is going to have transformative impact on your thinking. So I'm glad you're here to tune into it. I also want to talk to you about the fact that getting this information out into the world is getting harder and harder every day. Censorship is growing to levels that we've never seen before, at least not in my lifetime. I want to encourage you to invest in this project, to own this series, to be able to visit it on demand. We have multiple packages that are available for you. You can find the one that you think best fits for you. Know that there are special bonuses that are a part of the thank you that we give you to say, when you buy the series, you're supporting our mission, you're helping us get this out into the world, and we want to give you as much value in return that we possibly can. So on the spiritual level, I just say thank you very much. And from the material level, by you buying, you're helping us with the resources to be able to do this work. And I have to tell you, with the state of the world right now, this work is really important. So thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting us. Let's dive into episode 7. Welcome to part 3 of my 3-part interview with Dr. James Lyons-Weiler. As you can see, we think his information is really important. That's why we gave him 3 parts of an interview in this series. Really magical way he can take complex things, spin them up, have you understand them, and then lead a chain of logic that can bring you to conclusions. Part 3 brings it all home. You need to see this, so make sure you're not distracted. Enjoy part 3 of this interview. So now I want to wander into the realm of vaccines. And you
Sure.
said something that I think is an important reference point as we start to consider. They've been trying to make a coronavirus vaccine for a long time. It wasn't like, oh, they just started to work on this. And some of what I had read is that exactly what you said with pathogenic priming, saying that they were testing vaccines on, and was it ferrets? Was that the end? Or
There were ferrets and rats, I think.
and I think they said the ferrets somehow that their respiratory systems, somehow mimic the human respiratory system, which is why they were, preferred animal. in that they would give the vaccine, they would see the antibody response thinking, wow, okay, this worked. They're now making antibodies. And then they would do what should be done in science, re-expose them, again, to the wild virus. And it actually made them more susceptible, increasing they got very sick and died. The mortality rates went way up. Is that accurate from what you've seen?
Absolutely. So it actually started back in the 1950s and 60s where they were trying to develop a vaccine for RSV. And back then it was ethical to vaccinate children with an experimental vaccine and then challenge them with the wild type virus, if you can believe it.
No, I can't.
So when they did that, a huge percentage of those children had to be hospitalized and 2 died. This sent shockwaves throughout the community, the medical community, vaccine community, and so on. And it was called, in that article, disease enhancement. So now we're moving fast forward to the point where, after 1986, after 76 with the National Vaccine Program, 86 with the passing of the Act, and now there's indemnity against liability for damage. It becomes a public perception exercise on vaccine injury. Then they actually changed it from disease enhancement to immune enhancement. And I think, given your background, you know what immune enhancement really is. It's not making you more sick with a vaccine. It's actually vitamin D, sunshine, exercise, good food, good relationships with people, things that actually enhance your immune response in a positive way, strengthen your immune response. So when I came into this, words have power, and I realized that people are not going to understand what's happening as long as they keep calling it disease enhancement. When Moderna came out with the idea that they were going to use their mRNA vaccine against SARS-CoV-2, they managed, along with Dr. Anthony Fauci, to convince the FDA that they didn't have to do preliminary animal trials first. They skipped the animal trials. They didn't use ferrets. They didn't use rats or mice. And in skipping those trials, they lost their opportunity to say, wait a minute, this particular vaccine with the spike protein is likely to cause disease enhancement. And so the society was denied the opportunity to have that discussion, to say, hey, there's a problem here. Go back to the drawing board. The FDA didn't have a chance to say what you guys should do. In April, because I saw this happening, I went and I looked at all of the proteins that are coded by the SARS-CoV-2 genome, and I looked at the homology or similarity between human proteins and SARS-CoV-2 proteins. Every single immunogenic epitope that was there, I think there are 38 of them, except one. Immunogenic meaning it can cause an immune reaction, which is what you want for a vaccine. Every single immunogenic epitope, except one, had a very significant part of epitope that matched human proteins in the brain, in the spleen, in the ubiquitously. There's some proteins expressed throughout. In the immune system, a third of them match proteins in the immune system. The implications of that is that I predicted all of the off-target, non-lung pathologies that we're seeing now from SARS-CoV-2. And it's sadly, my study's been validated dozens of times over with doctors, more than that now, 2 or 3 dozen times, of people publishing peer-reviewed research saying what's going on with this person's kidney, what's going on with this person's spleen, why are they having these off-target, why are they having coagulopathy? Okay. And we know from other studies and just experience, we know that if you get infected with certain kinds of viruses, you can develop Guillain-Barré syndrome. We also know that the flu vaccine can cause Guillain-Barré syndrome. We know that the flu vaccine in Europe caused narcolepsy. That was settled in the European Vaccine Court. And we know the reason why. There's similarity between the orexin receptor. In some families, the similarity is higher due to genetic variation in the human population. These people, due to genetic variation in their families, have orexin receptor proteins that are more similar to the H1N1 flu protein. And so when their bodies mounted an immune reaction to the vaccine, it also mounted an immune reaction against their own orexin protein. And so these people just fall asleep randomly. They have a problem processing the orexin protein. And so there's misfiring of those receptors probably. So we're looking at a very, very well-established problem if you're exposed once to a viral protein or a bacterial protein, and then later on you get another exposure. It probably explains a lot of relapses in MS, for instance, and things like that. So this is why I called it pathogenic priming. It's the act of the initial exposure to the protein that causes the priming of the immune system in certain circumstances to then lead to autoimmunity. And so after I wrote this paper, I sent the paper to all the vaccine manufacturers, and I said, you guys need to take these unsafe epitopes out. The last time I did this analysis was when Zika was allegedly causing microcephaly in South America. That's a whole other issue I'll talk with you about some other time, but Zika is not responsible for the microcephaly. We know that now. But I wrote to Anthony Fauci. I sent him the list of unsafe epitopes in the Zika virus proteome. That is, I said, of all the vaccines you're developing, if you include these proteins, you're going to cause problems with autoimmune encephalitis. Okay, so they need to be taken out. He never acknowledged receipt of my letter. However, a week later, he said that he needed 8 more months for the Zika vaccine. So it's likely that he sent it along. And I'd like to think that perhaps if the Zika vaccine comes out, that it'll be safer. With respect to COVID-19 vaccines, no, none of them responded. Again, I don't know why they feel that they can benefit from, the efforts of a scientist somewhere and not just say, oh, thank you. Nice thank you would be fine. I'm trying to save your product, right? I'm trying to save humanity. You've got a problem where you might be causing worse coronavirus in the people that get vaccinated. The thing about the animal studies was it was the older animals that got more serious. Primarily, it was the older animals that got more serious coronavirus symptoms from MERS and from SARS. And so I was shocked to see that the FDA is rolling this out with prioritization of people in nursing homes. Absolutely shocked, because that's where the highest severe coronavirus due to pathogenic priming and disease enhancement is going to take place. It's almost a certainty that we're going to see mass casualties from this as a result of pathogenic priming, and it's not too late. There's other vaccines that are under development. I've reviewed 3 papers from vaccine manufacturers and people planning vaccines in vaccine-type journals that they asked me to be a peer reviewer on it. And I pointed out to my paper, I said, listen, we did this in April. You should take these unsafe epitopes out. And the editor agreed, and the authors agreed. They resubmitted it. They redesigned their vaccines to avoid the unsafe epitopes. I have no financial interest whatsoever in any vaccine, and I never will. So it's not as though I'm gaming the system for my own favorite vaccines. But it's amazing to me that Peter Hotez and Paul Offit both came out because Moderna was a front runner and Pfizer was a front runner, not Merck. They both came out and said, we have to make sure these vaccines don't cause a disease enhancement. They actually talked about it on CNN.
I was shocked actually by Offit's comments that, because he's not the guy that normally talks about caution. So if he's talking about caution, it means it's got to be really bad in my view.
Well, it also could mean that their favorite vaccine manufacturer doesn't have a front runner vaccine, doesn't it? It could have been competition.
You know what? I didn't think of that, and because I just don't know how to be that evil in my thinking. I have to learn it so I can better understand. It's an incomprehensible level of evil when people can do these types of things, looking at what the stakes are, especially people who already have significant wealth. And it's like, come on, at what point does the truth matter? And it's, but still the question, at what point does the truth really matter? My saying on this is the truth is only a problem for those who oppose it. So the question, I guess, maybe comment I have, and I want to get into like a little bit of a lightning round with you if I can, like just like hit a couple of things.
I have one more comment on the original question that sparked all of that.
Yes.
So the Pfizer and Moderna both did do ultimately animal studies. They used non-human primates, and they infected the animals with SARS-CoV-2 virus after vaccination, and they examined for immunopathology. They didn't find any. Mm-hmm. However, they also didn't look for off-target effects. They didn't look at the spleen. They didn't look at the bladder. They didn't look at the lung. They looked at the lung. By not looking at the brain, they didn't look at all of the possible sites for these off-target effects. And therefore, we really don't know what diagnoses these older people who get the vaccine and then get infected are going to come up with. We're going to see these mysterious illnesses that never had a name before in people that are vaccinated, and it's going to be a mystery.
Well, and thank you for saying that, because my assertion is that this is way too complex. The whole scenario that's being developed and observed is way too complex to try to simplify to simple A to B conclusions. Okay, we did this, we didn't see it in the lungs, we're good. That is, I believe that's basically almost criminal ignorance, as far as really what the circumstances dictate. Because, for example, when we look at adverse vaccine reactions in general, prior to this, so many things that maybe aren't dramatic and immediate after the vaccine is given, but are downstream, maybe even months or years, that are a byproduct of the vaccine, allergies, asthma, the milder things that don't kill you and don't make you autistic, are still there, or at least potentially there. And so with the time that was spent doing the tests, as you described, on non-human primates, they'd say, oh, okay, they re-exposed them, and they didn't see that they got very sick and died right away. Well, how much time did they observe them? And as you said, what about these other areas, the lungs or the respiratory system, but are distal to that might have been affected? And what happens a year, 2 years, 3 years? Nobody knows. And it's certainly not a leap of thinking or a leap of faith to conclude that there's a great possibility that there could be these effects that would take a long time before they started to emerge. So those things all concern me greatly. And as far as these vaccines, as you said, they skip they skip certain aspects of it. They've been now through the threat of a pandemic, and what's going on. They are now authorized, not approved by the FDA. So even I think safety and efficacy was already not good enough for vaccines, and now they've even skipped that part and said, oh, we're authorizing it because we're in emergency circumstances. So I guess, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just in a word or two, as far as the vaccines are being proposed, and there's the RNA vaccine, and then maybe the more traditional type vaccines, do you have misgivings about them, or do you feel comfortable with them? Where are you with that right now?
Well, I've looked deeply into the FDA filings of Moderna, and the numbers that they report don't match up with any semblance of reality, I'm sorry to say. First of all, Moderna had one patient that was reported early in their data compilation to have died on the vaccine arm, who was later, during data cleanup, and that's their term, not mine, to be resurrected, and he became a serious adverse event. I don't know what the story is behind that. But in the control arm, which is a placebo, they also had someone who was a serious adverse event that was reclassified on data cleanup as a death. Further, Moderna decided, when they're looking at serious adverse events, to exclude anyone who had a serious adverse event after the first dose from the trial. And they didn't count those numbers. So when they report 0.5% adverse event, you also have to consider the number that they excluded. And I'm doing those calculations right now. And when you look at the efficacy, because they excluded people that got coronavirus after the first dose, and they didn't count those numbers in terms of efficacy, that's like saying, wait a minute, I'm going to test some new chemotherapy agents, but anybody that dies after the first scheduled dose, I'm not going to count that in the mortality of the study. That's completely wrong. So they calculated an efficacy of 94.5%, and my recalculation, which I'm about to publish, is 95.4% to 95.5%, or whatever it was, down to 75.4%.
Is that a relative assessment versus actual? What I'm saying? Because when I was looking at it,
yes,
I'm not a biostatistician, but it seems like it was, how to lie with statistics. basically saying, well, this many got it, out of 30,000 people or whatever, this many, got sick with COVID who got the vaccine. It was only 8 where 160 or whatever, got it who didn't get the vaccine, but it's out of 30,000. So the relative risk, you speak to that.
So I recalculated the 94.5%. What it is the ratio between the number of, what they've did is the ratio between the number of people who were infected who got the vaccine to the ratio of, the percentage of people who didn't get the vaccine. So it's built in. It's a relative to the, so that to that extent it's appropriate. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to throw out people from the study that actually got coronavirus after the first dose, and report 94.5% effective, what you're saying is that the efficacy is 94.5% for everyone. Now, that's not true. It's 75.4%, and it certainly isn't for everyone. The on-trial death rate during the 56 days of the trial, of those 13 people that they counted as dying, was 0.4 deaths per 100,000 per day. That's my calculation of their data. Mm-hmm. In the United States, a daily death rate per 100K is something like 2.4 deaths per 100K per day. So these are superhuman beings, super healthy people who have no comorbidities. They don't have asthma. They don't have autoimmune diseases. They don't have any evidence whatsoever of prior experience or bad experience with the vaccine. Mm-hmm. These are not just an ideal population. This is a superhuman population. And they're extrapolating the health of people who are vaccinated and not vaccinated. They're all super healthy people. And yet we saw deaths. We saw deaths and we saw serious adverse events. So their data need to be gone over with a fine-tooth comb, and they need to justify why they called the deaths that occurred not associated with the vaccine. Some of the deaths and the causes of deaths that are listed are known to occur as likely causes of vaccines. Mm. So how their physicians could classify all of the deaths that occurred as not being causally related to the vaccine it's a miracle. They had such a short period of time. If a child dies from a vaccine and the parents decide to sue a National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program in the United States, you could expect 12 years of deliberation. Mm. And statements and examination by many, many experts on the causality of that child's death. So there's no way that they know that these deaths were not associated with the vaccine. And I'm sorry to say that. I wish I could say the opposite. I wish I could say I had full confidence in this and everything's going to be great. I can't. I care too much about humanity. I don't want people to walk in blindly with blind faith and then to have something go wrong. A death, very serious adverse event, paralysis, and so on. Because the doctors are going to say, well, we didn't see it in the clinical trial, so there's no study that ever showed, so therefore we know it wasn't the vaccine. There's a great sliding scale of evidence that I call it a great sliding scale of evidence. For Anthony Fauci, you need gold standard, very large, randomized, long-term, double-blinded, placebo-controlled clinical trials before we can use hydroxychloroquine, for instance, in early treatment of coronavirus with hydroxychloroquine. But for a vaccine, no, it's a vaccine. It's fine. That's the level of evidence.
It's much more dangerous than hydroxychloroquine, right? So
potentially, yes. Yeah. You will never see disease enhancement from hydroxychloroquine. You will never see pathogenic priming. Hydroxychloroquine is not a pathogenic primer. Vaccines can be a pathogenic primer.
Yeah, and we've got decades and decades of use of hydroxychloroquine to be able to look at. So,
absolutely.
And you've got a biological rationale for it with zinc. So I would look at this and say, okay, if you're saying there's a 0.4% death rate, what's the death rate from COVID if you get it?
Yeah, right. So that's a good question. The 0.4%, it's not, I'm sorry I misspoke. It's not 0.4%. It's 0.4 from their data, 0.4
of 100,000
per 100,000 per day.
Okay.
Right. So in terms of percentages, it's too early to say because I'm just talking about the people that died when according to their criteria, we had enough people that developed coronavirus. So we still don't know the outcome of all the other people on the trial, and those data will have to be analyzed and gone through as well. So I think it's too early to know the percentage of deaths on coronavirus vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Second, we don't know how many people are then going to turn around and die because of pathogenic priming.
Mm-hmm.
Those deaths are not going to be counted. If they're not counting the deaths within the trial that occurred as potentially due to the vaccine. And that's the other thing. We talked about shaving corners on this and cutting corners. They combined the phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. Now, let me explain why they should not have done that. They should not have done that because to have a phase 2 trial is to have a trial where you actually get a list of potential adverse events. So you know which adverse events you call solicited, and then you just open it up and say, okay, which are the ones that are unsolicited? By combining phase 2 and 3, they only have one type of jeopardy. They don't have double jeopardy. They say, these are the things that these experts told us to look for that we think might be due to coronavirus. Well, what if the vaccine causes you to grow horns out of your head, right? There's never been a study that shows that it causes horn growth formation. I mean, there's some people that might want to adopt the vaccine because of that, I guess, but, whatever. That's a lifestyle choice. But if it causes horns to grow out of your head, it's not on the list of solicited adverse events. And so when they see it in the trial, they're going to say, I can't think of any biologically plausible reason why this vaccine would cause horn growth. That's not, but the whole purpose of the study is to determine what the vaccine might do. So there's a sleight of hand, as you call it, definitely a sleight of hand going on here. It may be intentional. It may be just a culture. It may be just a cultural thing within vaccine safety science where they've all drunk the Kool-Aid that because they're in public health and because they're saving the world with a vaccine, that their medical people wear white coats, and they have stethoscopes. So that means that when they say it wasn't the vaccine, it must not have been the vaccine.
So I guess just summarizing is that the vaccines, in my mind, because people say, would you get, I'm absolutely like, no, I'm not getting this vaccine. My family's not getting this vaccine. That's me. Everybody do your own research and thinking. That's just where I land. But I think it's at least reasonable to say that the testing that's been done is scant compared to what even vaccines normally get. Secondly, there is, I think, statistical sleight of hand that's gone on with the representations they're making about the effectiveness. And it's so strange to me when I see, like I'm watching the news and I see, this, whoever the medical correspondent is, oh yes, the Moderna vaccine, 95% effective, blah, 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 blah. They're just parroting things without actually doing the analysis to understand what was meant by that and see that it's literally an empty statement. But in the end, grave concerns about the vaccines. So now let me lightning round you a little bit, if I can.
All right, sure.
So let me start with number one. To you, in your definition of what a pandemic can and should be, is there any basis to characterize a dangerous pandemic that is occurring when the year-over-year death rates have not changed?
Well, the problem is that they've been mistreating and misdiagnosing coronavirus, and so the death rates have changed. Mm-hmm. The death rates are amplified, but most of what we thought we knew about the death rates from China was wrong. I was scared to death of this virus. I thought that it was going to kill people who I love very dearly with a 20% fatality rate in people with diabetes. That was enough for me to get very serious about this. I mean, that's a very serious death rate. It turned out that death rate did not generalize, not only not outside of Wuhan district, but also Hubei district, I should say. It didn't generalize to the rest of China. And then it didn't generalize to the rest of the world. And so this fear was never pulled back. They had that fear communicated, and that's a valuable currency to get the population to go, oh, look, pay attention, this is something serious. Oh, we have to lock down, we have to wear masks, we have to socially distance, we have to do this. I think it's the height of irresponsibility that our public health officials didn't have a press conference and say, hold the phone, folks. We've got some updated information. We got some really good news here. If you're not over 80 years old, 70 years old, and you don't have serious comorbidities, and you're not from Wuhan in the months when we first thought about this virus, first discovered this virus, you're probably going to be just fine. They never said that.
No.
They also did way too much of the high-pressure, protocol-driven ventilating. Get them on a ventilator. There were people that were talking and walking and said, we got to get you on a ventilator right now. Why? I'm fine. No, you have to be pretty sick before, well, we want to save your life because the last one we lost because we ventilated them.
Mm.
Okay, but did you test for bacterial pneumonia? They died of what? Sepsis? You don't get sepsis from a viral infection.
Mm.
But they didn't know that because it's a new virus and they forgot everything that they were ever taught.
So, I'm sorry because I think I was a little lazy with my language. I was referring to, when I said death rate, what I really meant was looking at all-cause mortality year over year, saying that how many people are dying in a culture, and I'm sure you've been looking at it a lot closer than I have, but I'm looking at all these places, and then I'll throw in, of course, the thing that sends a chill down everybody's spine who's bought into the whole lockdown, shutdown thing, which is Sweden. And even looking at a place that didn't shut down, didn't mask, didn't socially distance, and you look at their all-cause mortality, year over year, there's no change. So can we really have a threatening pandemic when all-cause mortality is not changing?
Well, I mean, that really depends, right? So what's the purpose of having a classification category of outbreak, epidemic, pandemic? Mm-hmm. The purpose of that is that it unleashes funds from Congress. That's the purpose of it. So if you have an outbreak that becomes an epidemic, you have to have 6 or 7% of the mortality be explained by that. That's why they lump together all these respiratory viruses, called an influenza disease, and they go, oh, okay, good enough. Yeah, you get your money. And so that is a perverse incentive. I got to stop you there.
That I had no, and I've been having many conversations around this. Nobody's ever made that connection before. And it was like, oh, now I get it. I didn't realize that there were definitions around these things as far as outbreak, epidemic, pandemic that were tied to legislative funding, and that this is a story in and of itself. So you're saying is, by combining these diagnoses and making attribution, or I should say misattribution, for this, we got money to go do that.
Right.
Wow.
Right, exactly. Okay. And if there is, thank you. So if there is a epidemic or a pandemic, right? So medical errors were the third leading cause of death up until 2019. Mm-hmm. Misdiagnosis of COVID and mistreatment of people that didn't have COVID and killing them on ventilators or killing them because they developed bacterial pneumonia, sepsis, and all the rest has made medical error the number one cause of death in the United States.
Well, no surprise there. And I believe, so now we're looking at the cost. So, but ultimately, let's say that there's no such thing as COVID. We're in the pre-COVID world, and it's interesting because it's pre-COVID, post-COVID world are two different worlds. Yeah. And in the pre-COVID world, if there was like a Spanish flu, hey, that was a pandemic, and death rates, things changed quite a bit. In this world, we're looking like we're just reshuffling the chairs a little bit to, where there's the same amount of chairs. All-cause mortality hasn't changed, but we're just going to change attribution. And you talked about earlier saying, there's no flu this year, but there's all this COVID. We start to see that literally the whole thing is based on a fallacy in my mind, and that there's no real threat, that is, different than other years as far as, there's not a bunch of more people dropping dead. And like you said, hey, in the beginning, scary time, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns, but we're in a different world now. And so I was just curious, how you saw that, and you just put two and two together, saying, these people now, hey, there's deep pockets over here, and if we can somehow meet a threshold by lying about death rates, we can unleash a bunch of money, and boy, does that make certain people very wealthy, while you're taking working people and destroying their lives economically. So you create a bigger wealth gap.
You nailed it.
And if you look at the threat, I think one of the biggest threats that's going to be the byproduct of the post-COVID world is the increase in the wealth gap. That to me sends chills down my spine as I'm observing it. So now let me ask this: masks. So on the lightning round, I'm getting a lot of people saying this whole mask thing is completely ridiculous and it's more about control than it is about actually about limiting the transmission of the disease. What are your thoughts around it?
Sure. Well, look, start back in the Spanish flu since you brought that up. Actually, there was a very large number of medical physicians back then, physicians who said most people that are dying from Spanish flu don't have influenza. They had bacterial pneumonia. So if you dig deep into the history of that, this problem has been onset since way back then. I mean, we're talking the early 1900s. And there does not seem to be sufficient public awareness that people are entitled to an accurate diagnosis. So I'm calling for people in all 50 states to pass legislation that requires definitive diagnosis for every case of respiratory virus. And I'm talking about defining the pathogen, validating the pathogen was actually present, and can you culture it? And now that's going to be a massive expense, but that's what medicine's driven on. Fine. Turn into a testing thing, but test for everything. All right? They're not going to want to do it. They're going to fight you every step of the way. It's going to be very difficult for legislators around the country to say, no, we don't want to know if people are getting bacterial pneumonia. No, we don't want to know who's getting influenza. Why? COVID lives matter, but the other ones don't? Is that what you're saying? Right? So we've got these tools that we can use now. So when it comes to the masking issue also goes back to the Spanish flu. There were doctors back then that were publishing things that would read like it was out of the papers right now. That this doctor says masks accumulate pathogens, right? So an N95 mask has a doffing on and a doffing off procedure. I guarantee you, if you think that you're safe from COVID-19 or any bacterial pathogen or any other virus that's going to cause respiratory illness because you happen to be wearing an N95, someone should do the documentary, The Life of a Mask, where we follow the mask from the masked viewpoint, not from the human viewpoint, 100%. You stuff it in your purse. You put it in your pocket. What else has been in your pocket? You go to the restaurant. You throw it on the table. Who else was there before? You hang it from your ear, these new earrings that everybody has, right? But the most important time is the kids, especially the kids, and this upsets me really a lot. Kids should never, ever, ever have to mask. First of all, they do not transmit. They keep trying to publish studies that show that that's wrong, but they do not transmit. Why? Because they don't have high viremia, because they have innate immunity. The children are protected, given special protection against respiratory illnesses, respiratory viruses, due to innate immunity. The body kills the virus before it can cause problems without antibodies. So second, you put a mask on a kid, they're sitting there, and they're going to be breathing in and out all day long, and they tend to be mucousy. Kids, especially young kids, they tend to drool and slobber. I love my kids, don't get me wrong, but they tend to accumulate on their masks a bioreservoir, a biofilm. To expect a kid to sit there for 1 hour with a mask is unrealistic biologically, let alone 5 or 8. So these kids that are sitting there, and they're constantly, people are playing with their mask. Chuck Schumer's a great example of this, the politician, constantly touching his mask and so on. Where you got to watch where your hands have been, and then, okay, no medical doctor ever would do that if they're wearing an N95 mask, right? They're also in a lower temperature environment. If you're a surgeon, you're wearing an N95 mask, and there's a high pressure. Why? Because you're supposed to have the proper mix of oxygen to nitrogen ratio in your blood. And if you impede the breathing of some people, you're going to have a problem. So finally, the problem with masking kids, this generation of kids is we don't understand ambient learning. Children learn the significance of words, the significance of phrases, the significance of events by watching facial expressions. And if they can't see the adults or their friends unmasked to see their facial expressions, we're completely socializing them in ways where, just imagine, it's sad. Think of growing up and never seeing your teacher smile at you, ever. So they should mandate clear masks for teachers. They should mandate clear masks. If you're going to mandate a mask, it should be a clear mask. And the state should provide it if it's that important. How do you know that mask wasn't kicking around? I mean, I've heard of people, I won't say who, that will pick up a mask off the ground so they can go into a restaurant. I mean, really? Seriously. Let's get real here. If you want to be healthy, don't trap pathogens near your mouth and nose. That's the lesson. And they can culture tons of pathogens that you otherwise would not have been exposed to.
I feel great clarity around what you're saying relative to the mask issue. Now, what about the argument that it's not about protecting you, but it's about protecting others from you, that it's going to hold stuff in? So now, and incidentally, that's saying, hey, you've got to, deplete your own health just to try to, prevent yourself from potentially spreading, this virus. Do you think that there's any validity to the idea that the masks prevent droplets from going out, which would prevent the spread of the disease, or is that pure speculation?
The droplets that we're most concerned about, and if you look at the literature, they're talking about people that are coughing or sneezing, right? So if I have a cough and I'm wearing a mask, I'll cough in my mask. But if I'm going to sneeze, I'm not sneezing in my mask. It takes a really special person to love humanity enough to sneeze in the mask that you then have to wear for the next 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So people will take it off, maybe go down their shirt or something, whatever. The point being, we're all taught proper viral respiratory hygiene, it's called now. They came up with a word for it. Cover your mouth when you cough. This does probably better than a mask. Just cover your mouth when you cough and then go wash your hands. Sneeze into your arm. Don't shake hands after you coughed into your hand, right? It's not like those behaviors are not ubiquitous in our culture, right? Cover your mouth when you cough. Every parent said that, right? So it's not as though we don't have alternatives to masks. It's especially important that we understand, like you brought up, the idea of forced or mandatory masking. There's a woman named Diane Doucette from Canada. I met her in New Brunswick, and she has a beautiful, beautiful message that she gave to the legislature there. It was a legislative committee. And she pointed out that with mandatory vaccinations, if you're forcing someone to allow the state to use your body for the purpose of another person, in case of, reducing transmission through herd immunity, it's a form of slavery. You're actually literally enslaving that person and their body. So, yeah, it's just a mask. You can say that. It's just a mask. But what are the attendant consequences? At the beginning, we talked about the balance of risk. What are the risks associated with masks? It's well known. There's a scientific literature on it. We can't consider the benefits or the potential benefits without considering the risks. So, yes, I think that a cloth mask will stop some droplets, but it should be an N95 according to CDC. Or 16 layers of cloth masks is what CDC requires to be the same as of an N95 mask. That's downgraded after COVID-19 from 20 layers. So initially the CDC was communicating you need 20 layers of cloth masks to stop droplets.
Wow. Well, this has been, kind of a tour de force when it comes to this whole COVID subject, and we've covered a lot of ground. And I very much appreciate the depth that goes into the conclusions, so that, as my mentor taught me, they said, dogma is to accept conclusions without understanding the thinking that went into creating those conclusions. I don't believe that. I think dogma is our enemy right now in very many ways. So I am delighted that we were able to really go deep and to see the thinking, understanding, the reference, what's known in the literature, et cetera, and try to draw conclusions and see why, we're not running around blindly, saying that the sky is falling, or that we got this wrong, and that we're ringing the alarm bells. That there's an extraordinary amount of deliberation that goes into this, and I'm just somebody who's extraordinarily appreciative that you exist, that you are doing the work, the research, the reading, and you have the unique ability to take all that and translate it and to present it. So it's been a wonderful experience to be able to be with you and have this conversation. So I want to thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, and I appreciate you having me on this, and I look forward to learning from the other people that you're going to have on this. We live in a world where the currency of knowledge is sometimes held to be exclusive because rare things are valuable. But that's not my experience. Knowledge doesn't mean anything unless you share it. So I'm very happy to share what I think I know. I don't know if you've had the chance to run into the Vax study that I did with Paul Thomas's data.
I don't think I have, no.
I'll send that to you. It came out in November.
Matter of
They
fact, I think
suspended
I
his
just
license
saw
by-
that on your website, and I think that's one of the most critical things we look at is vaccinated versus unvaccinated populations and trying to look at what goes on there. And that's being honest. The pro-vax people, I'd say the people who have a vaccine agenda seem to be very afraid of looking at that, and they should be. So what did we find when we compare these two populations? What did you find?
561 unvaccinated kids in Paul Thomas's pediatric practice that were born into the practice. So we have full provenance of their vaccination record. And over 2,300 that are variably vaccinated. And what we found was that the vaccinated kids are going to the doctor many, many, many times fold more than the unvaccinated kids to be seen for these conditions that we think might be caused by vaccines. That includes allergy, allergic rhinitis. Anemia was huge. Anemia, aluminum in the vaccines binds to transferrin. That prevents the binding of iron from the diet, preventing red blood cell. I think that's a huge component of what happens and interrupts brain development. You cannot possibly develop your brain without oxygen. The brain is the number one consumer of oxygen and energy in our body. And if the first few, so we found these associations of increased office visits. We also did subgroup analysis, and we looked at whether it was due to age or differences in healthcare use. The result actually has no difference in healthcare uptake for the people that take the least vaccines to the most vaccines. They're making all their well baby visits. So it's not as though the people that are not vaccinating are afraid of Dr. Paul and the other physicians there. They actually trust them very much. And so, but fever, of course, is the more vaccines you get, the more fever you get. So we have a positive control and a negative control. So in terms of healthcare seeking behavior, I think we address that directly by having these internal controls. The vaccinated kids require more healthcare than the unvaccinated kids, which means that it's more expensive to society to have a vaccinated child than an unvaccinated child when it comes to medical insurance, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
So by the same token, it's only a retrospective study. It falls short of being able to support causality. That's why we need the study to be replicated in a prospective study, and Paul's doing that with the FOI initiative, the Public Health Outcomes Initiative. And we're continuing. That was only phase 1. We have phase 2 as well, and that's being funded through IPAC, through public donations. These has nothing to do whatsoever with the government or vaccine manufacturers. In phase 2, we're going to look at aluminum containing versus non-aluminum containing. We're going to look at live versus non-live. And we're going to look at other comparisons that were suggested and other analysis suggested by the peer reviewers. This peer-reviewed science stands on its own as a unique validation of past vax versus unvax studies, like Anthony Mawson's, like the one by Brian Hooker and by Neil Miller, and there are others, survey studies and so on. But it's clinical data. And we've set up a paradigm now that because we're looking at not just the incidence of these outcomes, we're looking at the total disease burden. We're looking at how sick these kids are, that every vaccine safety study going forward should use that measure of relative incidence of office visits, because we presented the results of office visit incidences, or not office visit, but incidents. We presented the results of incidents as well. And I did a simulation and published it in this study that shows that looking at odds ratios of incidence is less powerful than the ratio of incidence, relative incidence of office visits. So we've made a methodological, theoretical advance in vaccine safety science. And in 2021, I'm going to start saying yes to the vaccine conferences. And I'm going to start going to them. And I'm going to start telling them this is how you have to do the science. And they're going to say, how do you know it's not just granola crunching moms that bring their kids out and let them eat breakfast in the sunshine and get fresh air and smell the flowers and spend time with their friends and give them more hugs? And I'm going to say, there's no ADHD in the unvaccinated. So if it is zero ADHD, so if it is a lifestyle choice, the number one public health priority should be to find out what that lifestyle choice is and stop everything else. Just find out what these kids are so much healthier. It's mind-blowing. In the ADHD situation, people that get 5% of the vaccines, relative to people who get 5% of the vaccines, there's 50-fold increase in ADHD, 50-fold increase in going to the doctor.
Wow.
Right. So take a look at that study, and be happy to do a more, in-depth thing sometime with you. You're a great interviewer. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that. I appreciate that. Kind of in conclusion, what's occurring to me as I'm listening to what you're saying and what your research has been demonstrating is that if I were going in to present this to people who really were the policymakers and decision makers, I'd have to start with the question saying, I just need to know, can you all handle the truth? And because if they're not open to being, to everything that they've been thinking being wrong, if they can't handle the truth, then we're whistling in the wind. But the truth shall set you free. So we'll keep trying to beat that truth.
In our philosophical rants in the middle of the night sometime, when we do that one and we go really deep, I'll debate with you about truth versus science. And it is one study. It needs to be validated, but it's worth keeping in mind that what's true about it is my representation of where the data came from, the provenance of the data. It's regulatory compliant. I didn't do anything funny to make it look this way. Yeah. And what the criticisms that I'm getting are that, well, it's probably granola crunching moms. Well, fine. Drop everything you're doing and find out what that is. The NIH needs to fund this study of what this magical lifestyle is that puts an end to all this chronic illness, because our kids are so sick.
Indeed. So again, it's been, Dr. Jack, it's been just an extraordinary journey. And I don't think I've ever learned so much in so little amount of time. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for giving me the forum and, everything that you're doing. It's the kind of experience that I think everybody should have once in a lifetime. It's been a thrill for me. It's really great. I look forward to working with you in the future.
That concludes part 3 of my 3-part interview with Dr. James Lyons-Weiler. As you can see, we needed to give this man the time to lay all of this information out and bring it to a conclusion. I was really riveted. I'd never met him prior to interviewing him for this series, and I have to tell you, I was so blown away. I had great expectations. It's beyond anything I could have hoped for. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. Riveting information and need to know information. So thanks for being here with me to experience it. When I think of Dr. Rashid Buttar, I think about a warrior. I can't imagine how this guy gets up every day, enters into the battles that he enters in. He's still in a medical practice. He still has a medical license, yet he is a nonconformist. He does what he knows to be right to serve his patients, and he will take on whatever fight he has to speak his truth and to do things the way that he thinks things should be done. So he's a champion for many. People follow him because he will take unpopular positions. The truth matters more than anything else. He doesn't avoid the fight. He walks head on into it. And it's amazing what he's achieved in his life thus far. And I'm excited about what he's going to achieve into the future. So naturally, when it came to this whole issue of COVID-19, the policies around it, and the vaccines that they're looking to put into the market, he's one of the first names that comes to mind saying, we have to talk to Dr. Buttar about this and see what he has to say. And now it's my privilege to be able to share that with you.
Dr. Buttar, I always want to come to you when we're talking about very important health-related subjects. Your experience is extraordinary. You're a maverick thinker, but you don't just think, you practice. I mean, literally practice. You see patients, so that the conclusions you draw, you're putting on the ground with people that actually are in your care. And we've spoken about a variety of subjects because they are related to your practice, things like vaccines and cancer and other such challenges that you speak to very passionately. So just in a thumbnail, can we just get your background? How did you become the maverick that you are as far as your approach and thinking when it comes to medical care?
Well, Dr. Gentempo, thank you first for inviting me to talk about this topic, which I know is the hottest topic right now, probably on the planet. But as far as my background, I knew I was going to be a doctor when I was pretty young, probably 10, 11 years of age, and graduated from high school at 17, college at 21, med school at 25. I kind of always did things a little bit differently, and to me, just because somebody does something a certain way doesn't mean that it's the best way, so I'm always looking to do something better. And medicine, you know, in various professions, I know you've been now in the documentary and movie production business for some time. You know, if you make a mistake, you may not get as many people buying the movie. Accountant makes a mistake, you know, somebody pays more taxes, you know, even an attorney makes a mistake and somebody goes to jail. Okay, these are all not desirable things, but when doctors make mistakes or we don't get the outcome we're supposed to, you know, our mistakes are counted in body bags. Mm-hmm. And it's a very sad scenario, but I saw the level of incompetence in medicine early on. While I was still in medical school, there were things that I didn't understand why they were doing it, because it defied logic, it defied common sense. And when I would ask the question, why are we doing it this way? The answer that I got was always a very pathetic excuse. And that was, well, that's how we've always done it. And it didn't make any sense. The first time this actually happened was in a post-trauma situation in a surgical intensive care unit where we were giving a patient a certain type of fluid. We were giving them crystalloid. Actually, we were giving them a colloid. And I asked, why are we giving this fluid? And it was, you know, since then things have changed, but at least in that particular hospital. But the reason that I got was, you know, the senior resident looked at me and said, because this is how we've always done it. And it just didn't make any sense, because, you know, you give somebody colloid, it's great, except that it's very transient, and we should be giving crystalloid, in my opinion. Now, if you can, you know, if you need to give a crystalloid with the colloid in order to just get a transient osmotic shift in the fluid status in a person, then fine. But, you know, it was just like a routine standard. There was no assessment of what was going on with the patient, and that's one of the things that bothered me, I guess. And so I went to Brooke Army Medical Center at Fort Sam, Houston, at the Institute of Surgical Research, and I started my residency there. And I served with the military in a couple of different capacities. I was with the 2nd Infantry Division, and I was attached to the 101st Air Assault Division for some movements, and was also served with the 5th Special Forces Group. And, you know, those are kind of those, at least with like the SF, it's not typical for doctors to do that kind of stuff. You know, it's considered a little stupid for doctors to be participating in those type of things. But I've just kind of always done things a little bit differently. I just want a better outcome. You know, it's not, I wish I could give you like a real fancy story, but it's just that to me, if there's a wall that I've got to go through, it's better for me to turn the knob on the door and walk through the door than trying to butt my head against the wall. And it seems like many of the things that we do in not just medicine, but in every aspect of life, you know, from the media to economics to the judicial system to politics and healthcare, in everything, it seems like we are not really doing things in the most efficient manner or the best manner possible. In fact, many times it seems to be orchestrated to do things in the wrong manner. And so the question is why, and the answer is usually because somebody's vested in that more moronic way of doing things because they generate more revenue. And, you know, you should look at Big Pharma. It's a perfect example. People always say, yeah, they're motivated by money. And I think, well, if they were really motivated by money, then to me, this is just my opinion, to me, if it was based upon money and power, then you would think that they would actually do something more health-oriented to promote health, because they would get more money and they'd get more power because people were getting better. But I don't think it's about money and power. I think if it's anything, it's about dumbing the population down and hurting people. It's more sinister than just power and money. I think it's a difference between good and evil, because honestly, if you have a product A and I have product B and my product is better than yours, it's faster than yours, and makes people feel better, why wouldn't they get product B? And the answer is they would. So you just let free capitalistic economic principles go into play. The best product is going to win. But here, the best product they want to suppress, they want to dumb it down, they want to villainize it, they want to demonize it, they want to ostracize it, and they promote something that's going to cause more harm, more discomfort, long-term sequela, And so if it was just about money, then they wouldn't be doing that. It's more sinister. So, it really came down to, originally I just wanted to do things better, but later on it was to do things for the right reason. And unfortunately, the herd doesn't usually go in the right direction. So I've been, you called me a maverick. I've been labeled as the most censored doctor now on the planet in the last 4 or 5 months. I don't really consider myself a maverick. I don't really consider myself censorship worthy. I mean, to me, it's the truth. But I guess if the truth is the agenda to prevent the truth from getting out, then I'm censorship worthy. But I don't think it's really a maverick thing. It's just more common sense to me. It's like the right thing to do. So
yep.
I'll take whatever label they give me. As long as you don't label me with the rest of the idiots, I'm fine.
Well said. So that's a perfect segue into this COVID scenario, and I know we'll talk a bit about the COVID vaccines, but I'd love to get your view on COVID in general, the whole pandemic or the supposed pandemic, how you see it, what you think some of the origins, if you have any opinions about the real origins of it, whether the social distancing, shutting down the economy, masks, etc. Is that another one of those moronic things, or do you think there's validity there? So give us your kind of big picture view.
Well, I'll just start off by warning you, Patrick, that you're going to have to rail me in, because I have a tendency to, go off tangent, and I'll go down each one of these rabbit holes. I already have numerous times. So the first interview that happened sometime in April was with the Next News Network. Their record video that they had ever put out was the highest video rating they had. I think it was 6.3 million views on a video that interview that they did with Michelle Obama that took about 3 years to hit that 6.3 million. They did an interview with me. It was a 45-minute interview. It was supposed to be 25 minutes. It was a 45-minute interview. Hit 9.1 million views on YouTube in 6 days.
Wow. And
YouTube took it down. And from that point on, every interview that I did with people, well-known people that said, don't worry, my YouTube channel, I've never had a video taken down, I would get taken down. Brad Lee interviewed me, the video got taken down. Luke Story did an interview with me, said it's never been an issue for me, the video got taken down. Patrick Bet-David, video got taken down. Every one of these videos got taken down. Every time we had a video that hit 1 million views or more within 24 to 48 hours, those videos would go down. I think I've had 76 or 77 videos on my own YouTube channel taken down, and all of them had hit 1 million views within a couple days. Now the videos that hit 1 million views over a week or 2 weeks, they seem to leave those up. But if it hits 1 million views within, a day or two, they take them down. It doesn't matter what the subject is. We had a video with Dr. Bruce Lipton and Nia Peoples and myself. We did a video to send out to the message to the world, and it was about gratitude, holding gratitude in your heart. They censored that video. They took that video down. I mean, we didn't even talk about COVID. It was just ridiculous. So, when you ask me about the whole COVID nonsense, I'll tell you that if there was one solution, if somebody said, hey, you can undo the stupidity, which is on an order of magnitude higher than any level of stupidity ever experienced by the human population in recorded or unrecorded time, which is right now what we're doing with this pandemic, I think that gives you the essence of what I feel about this nonsense. It is the media that is the problem. The propaganda is so unbelievable. I cannot believe that people still fall for the idiocy. I mean, just forget about, I was being interviewed and somebody talked about critical thinking. And I said, let's stop. Let's stop talking about critical thinking. I'm not picky. Let's not even talk about critical thinking. Just start thinking. You don't have to be critical about it. Just think. Do you really think that you can walk into a restaurant with a mask on, walk to the table with the mask on, protecting yourself, but then as soon as you sit down, because now you're 2 feet lower, that the virus says, oh, anybody that's below 4 feet level, head level, we're not going to be, we're not going to cause a problem. Do you really think that there's some kind of virus that's that sophisticated to know that you must maintain social distancing while boarding a plane, but then you can sit down 6 inches next to somebody that you've never known before and you're okay? Please wear your mask, cover your nose, and they get, like Nazi-like telling you to cover your nose, but then it's okay to take off your mask to eat and drink something. I mean, the level of stupidity is just mind-boggling. I mean, I can't even fathom how a person can allow themselves to get to that level of stupidity. And these are some of these people. I mean, I have my own family members that are in this level of stupidity. And I'm thinking to myself, my own sister, who's an attorney, a high-powered attorney, told my son, who you interviewed, I hope you don't buy into your dad's bullshit. I mean, I'm like, are you, honestly, and my son is like, he's talking to me, and I said, what did you say to you? And he goes, well, I don't want to be antagonistic to her. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to be antagonistic to her? He goes, Dad, if I'm antagonistic to her, I don't have the opportunity to change her mind. And I'm like, at this point, I think people are so ingrained in their own distorted belief system that it's hard to justify anything else, because some of these people are intelligent. So how can they actually get to that level of cognitive dissonance? If there are that many people that are that stupid that they think that there's a virus, that they should give up their entire autonomy and their independence, like Ben Franklin said years ago, those who are willing to exchange a little bit of the illusion of safety for their freedoms deserve neither. And this is really what we're coming down to. This has nothing to do with a virus. It's been used. There is a virus, yes, it is man-made, it is chimeric. I actually was one of the first people that talked about this. It was in Nature magazine, it was published. There was a chimeric manipulation of this virus. It was being done, they've been working on this for years, and based upon the outcry of many virologists that this chimeric process to assess the pandemic potential of a pathogen is unethical and it's dangerous and it should stop. And finally, the U.S. government heard the protest and in 2004 declared a moratorium on any further chimeric research. Well, COVID was already being worked on at a lab in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with not only doctors and researchers from Chapel Hill, but also from Sweden and from Harvard and from Wuhan. And in 2004, when the government passed that moratorium on no further chimeric research, and let me just, for your listeners, in case they don't know what chimeric research is or chimeric derivatives are, essentially it's a Frankenstein creation, a man-made manipulation creation of something that is naturally occurring. So it is not, a chimeric derivative is not naturally occurring. All right, it's basically a Frankenstein version. And why do they do that? They do that to study gain of function. What does gain of function mean? Gain of function is that you take something that's naturally occurring, you make it more highly virulent and more damaging and more pathogenic, and then you use that. Like, why would anybody take something naturally occurring and then make it more virulent, make it more pathogenic? Well, it's under the pretense of assessing the potential of it to cause a pandemic. So you are assessing the potential of a naturally occurring substance by changing it and deriving something that is highly more mutagenic and adaptogenic and virulent to then assess the potential of it causing a pandemic. Well, these damn rocket scientists, they need a hammer to the head, because why not just not do that and you don't have to worry about a pandemic? Because every pandemic that's been out there that we've known, it's all been because of some type of a external factor that's been created that causes the body to shift. So the more evolved virological theory that was more, well, it hasn't been widely accepted, but when you change the label, people seem to accept it very quickly. And this is the difference between viruses and exosomes. What is the difference between a virus and exosome? Oh, well, virus is pathogenic and causes disease, and exosomes are great and they enhance the body. Well, when you look at the morphological characteristics of exosomes and viruses, there is no difference. Okay? Morphologically, characteristically, they're identical. They're the same thing. They even look at the same in electron microscopy. But if you look at the more highly evolved theory of virology that was introduced by Rudolf Steiner over 100 years ago, viruses are really nothing more than a message that's being sent from our systems in response to an adaptogenic need to survive. So there's a signal that comes in, and then we get a symptom from that signal. The virus is a way to send the signal out so that others can get the same type of information and then create a response that is adaptogenically helpful. It's in a way, it's a mutagenic response, but it's designed to, by the ultimate engineer, by the creator, to help our bodies to adapt and understand what shifts need to take place. And this usually takes, it's a slow type of a process, but when new things are introduced into our environment, new epigenetic aspects are introduced, like during the Spanish flu, nobody remembers, except for Rudolf Steiner and some of the people that studied his work, it was the advent of the radio wave that came into our planet. That was when the radio waves were invented. Well, most humans weren't ever exposed to radio waves, and I think that caused, and in fact, Rudolf Steiner talks about it a lot more eloquently than I can, but it basically created a energetic shift, caused a characteristic change that our systems were not used to this new energetic impedance onto our system. So you can think of it as these radio frequencies, electromagnetic fields that were being generated by radio waves being introduced into society. We weren't able to handle off, and not all of us were able to. Certain cells were able to respond, but for the vast majority, that energy was not cell resonant. And so that caused the Spanish flu, and there was an adaptogenic response that happened and helped us to become more resilient. And each time something like this happens, it's an adaptogenic response. But, you know, it's like trying to kill a virus. A virus isn't even dead or alive. In fact, viruses need to live inside cells in order for them to even be viable. But they don't live, they're not alive and they're not dead. They're DNA fragments. So again, I don't want to go into what a RNA, DNA fragment and how that, you know, what a virus or an exosome is. I'm sure that's probably boring for the vast majority of people. But when we start looking at the current situation, you know as well as I do that there's no such thing as a pandemic that lasts more than a few months. Mm-hmm. Because by definition, it's going to spike, you have herd immunity, and then it dies off, and the species continues to survive and thrive, just like we have for eons. Now to have this illusion of a pandemic and to say that it's lasted 9 months and we need a second shutdown, you know, back in June, exactly 7 months ago, I have at least a half a dozen interviews and different people that interviewed me, and they asked me where I saw this coming and I said it's going to be a second wave, like Bill Gates talks about. This is a second wave, and they said, yeah, so you think that's BS? I said, no, I know there's going to be a second wave. Bill Gates is 100% right, but it's not what he's telling you. It's not going to be a second wave of the COVID hitting. It's because if, first of all, had people wear masks, which suppresses your lymphocyte subpopulation, drops your immune response, spikes your cortisol because you're in a state of fear, plus you're having to breathe oxygen through something restrictive, so you're reducing your own oxygen content in your body, which causes hypoxia, which increases cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which then decreases the lymphocyte subpopulation. So it makes you more susceptible to anything, any kind of virus, spirochete, mycoplasma, yeast, fungi, whatever. So it's stressing the body out. Second, they're scaring you into staying home about COVID. So people are staying home. Now they're going to start releasing people to tell them it's going to be okay to come home, come out from their homes. They're going to come out. They're going to be introduced to, they've been in a more sterile environment, so they haven't been able to pick up that herd immunity, the normal herd immunity that actually occurs in a normal pandemic situation. They're more immunocompromised. They're walking into a situation where they're going to be introduced to a bunch of new pathogens the body may have not been adapted to. And then on top of that, they're fearful, right? They're scared, which again renders the immune system more susceptible. So it's this loop that they've got. And then they're rolling out the 5G. And so people say, well, what's 5G got to do with COVID? Nothing. 5G has nothing to do with COVID. But 5G is another way, another electromagnetic radio frequency, dirty type of energy. It's causing a disruption in the voltage-gated calcium channels. And that disruption allows for an increase in permeability, not just to viruses, but to not just to COVID, but any kind of virus, any type of pathogen. So you've got 5G being rolled out. 5G, by the way, so people understand, the 5 gigahertz, I mean, it's the normal amount of energetics that we're being exposed to or have been exposed to, it's always been measured in hertz. Well, 1 gigahertz is 1 billion hertz. 1 gigahertz is 1 billion hertz. So when you have something that's rolling out at, say, 30 gigahertz, that's 30 billion hertz. So when you start talking about being exposed to this form of energetic that we haven't been exposed to before, it causes a disruption. Besides just the disruption in the voltage-gated calcium channels, it allows for more permeability. You've also got some of these things that, as described by supposedly with the COVID, where doctors have said this doesn't seem like it's a virus. It seems to be more mimicking something like altitude sickness. And these people, they can't seem to get oxygen, even though mechanically they're doing fine. Well, it's because of a disassociation between the iron from the hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin is the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. So it causes this disruption, and then they become essentially hypoxic. And then what do? We throw them on a ventilator, but you can't correct a chemical problem with the mechanical means. All right. This is like almost saying that it's like, I don't even know what an analogy would be, but it's like saying that in order to make sure that my car runs safe, I'm going to take a sledgehammer to it. It doesn't make any sense. The sledgehammer has nothing to do with making the car run safe. So they're putting these people in mechanical ventilator devices and cause barotrauma. And then there's other types of issues that can occur, but it's not going to solve their problem, which is a hypoxia, not because of a ventilatory issue, but because of a disassociation of iron from hemoglobin issue. So anyway, I've probably just verbally vomited on you and the audience, but hopefully you kind of get my stance on this whole thing. It's ridiculous at best, and the face mask and all this other stuff, it's stupidity on top of ridiculousness. And the second wave is basically stress. People are stressed out. They're scared. They've been immunocompromised because they've been kept inside their sterile homes. They've been rendered further immunocompromised because they're wearing these masks. Their systems are not optimum. And then they go outside into this scenario where they've got the 5G, and now they're rolling out with the vaccines. And when the vaccines cause these people to get sick and ill, they're going to see, we told you there's a second wave. It's not going to be blamed on the vaccines. The deaths aren't going to be blamed on the vaccines. It's going to be blamed on the second wave. Whereas in fact, the safest thing for you to do is take the damn mask off, walk in public, expose yourself to it if you haven't already been exposed, because I'm pretty sure the entire world's population has been exposed to it. I'm convinced that everybody's already had this. I'm sure that my two sons actually had it in December and January before COVID became a big thing, because both of them, they've gotten a cold here and there, but one of them was sick for 9 days, one was sick for 12 days, and then they were fine. They were out of it. And nobody's talking about the death rate. Everybody talks about the COVID, the numbers being spiking up, but they're only talking about the number of people that are being diagnosed. But they've already got people that you check the right nair, it's negative, left nair, you're positive. The president of Tanzania, before they allowed the PCR testing to come in, he said, wait, before we do this, I want to do our own testing. They did their own testing. They took 2 samples. They sent them out. They labeled them as patient 1, patient 2, but in actuality, one was from a piece of guava fruit, and the other one was from a goat. And they sent it off, and they both came back tested positive for COVID-19. So that's how absurd. In fact, just 2 days ago, there was a pretty prominent researcher doing a live broadcast to other researchers, was able to demonstrate how ridiculous this is. And in fact, if it hasn't already been censored, nope, it hasn't yet. Austrian lawmaker tests cola, like Coca-Cola. I don't think it was a brand name Coca-Cola, it's just regular cola, for COVID, and claims a positive test result that was returned shows that the test is worthless. So they did it live on Coca-Cola, and it's positive for COVID. So, it's testing for COVID. It's kind of like testing to see how many people have a finger. Everybody's going to test positive for it eventually. Mm-hmm. All right. So testing doesn't mean that you have a problem. In fact, the PCR test was developed by a doctor by the name of Kerry Mullis, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his development of the PCR test. So it's the RT-PCR, stands for real-time polymerase chain reaction test. And that test, Kerry Mullis himself said, you cannot use it to diagnose an infectious process or a pathogenic issue. The RT-PCR is designed as a signature identifier. It's picking up a signature, that's all. So it's like picking up a small fragment of DNA structure, and that's it. That doesn't mean you have a disease. It's just saying that you have that particular segment. And if you amplify the test enough, everybody's going to test positive for it. So the number of people that have tested positive who've never even had the test, or people that have been diagnosed with, and the cause of death because they died was COVID-19, but they had heart disease or cancer. There have been people that have died in motorcycle accidents, and their cause of death has been put down as COVID-19. I'm not exaggerating here. I've seen this myself. There are people that have committed suicide, and their cause of death was COVID-19. Suicide. Okay? Who would have known that the number 1 and the number 2 leading causes of death in the industrialized world, cancer and heart disease, that the solution for those 2 disease processes was COVID? Because nobody's dying of heart disease and cancer anymore. It's all COVID, right? So it's just, if this was really true, guys, and where are all the dead bodies at? Where are all the dead bodies of these homeless people that don't have any way of, social distancing, and they don't have the mask? And where are all those dead people? Where are all the homeless people that are dead? It's just lies. And people, then on social media, they'll say, COVID is a serious thing. I had COVID and I was on the death's doorstep, and I'm a young, healthy, bodybuilder, but I almost died, or I was on a ventilator for whatever. Okay, first of all, nobody's looking at the full history of this person, because I would want to examine the person myself. I want to know how many times did this bodybuilder do drugs? How many times did they take steroids and have other types of issues? And secondly, just because somebody comes and tells you that you have COVID and they put you on a ventilator, that doesn't mean that you needed to be on a ventilator. Just because somebody was stupid enough to put you on a ventilator and then you survived it miraculously, to say that it's COVID and blaming it on something, that's just absolutely idiocy. And the level of idiocy out there is just, it's perpetuating itself. The last thing I want to say before I take a breath and let you ask, because I'm sure I've gone off on all sorts of different tangents here. There was a video that was released yesterday. Actually, there have been two videos. Dr. Sherry Tenpenny sent me one video, and she said this is a really good one. It was a top 25 outspoken medical voices on the world right now, or most outspoken voices about the COVID issue right now. So she said, watch this. So I go to watch it. I got it like 15 minutes after she sent it. It's dead. So I told her, I said, the video link is gone. She went to find it. She goes, it's gone. And she said, it was really a great video. I was on it. You were on it. I thought you might want to watch it. And I was like, oh, great. I didn't even get to see the video. Then yesterday, there was a link sent to me on the chat group that we have, the little private chat group. It's 100,000 doctors and medical professionals oppose COVID-19 vaccine. 100,000 doctors and medical professionals oppose COVID-19. It's a video. When you click on it, it's gone. 100,000 doctors and medical professionals, and the video is gone. I mean, I got the link. I must have gotten to it like 2 hours afterwards. It's gone. Now tell me something. Why is this information being censored? What are they scared of? Because censorship is something that you would think about in North Korea, you would think about maybe in Russia, in some communist regime like China, but not in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And yet that's exactly what's happening. This censorship is no different than the old book burning. Modern day book burning is where you take down the videos, where they censor you, where they prevent you from having a dialogue. So I would just ask people to start thinking and remember history. Those who forget history are destined to repeat it. I don't know who said that. Somebody said that. I know it wasn't me, but I mean, that's something that I've heard, throughout my life. And it's like nobody remembers what happened during World War II. During what Hitler did. Nobody seems to be paying attention. And this is exactly out of that playbook. Just read history and then look at it right now. You will see the truth. And if you don't see the truth, then you're just blind.
Yeah, so what's interesting, and you made so many points, but I guess to consolidate or, to kind of bring it to a focus, like here's how you see it. Number one, this was man-made, meaning it was a naturally occurring virus. They were playing with it in a lab, and that's how it got created. Number two, that
Patrick, if you'd allow me to, if you do these numbers like this, then let me add to it just to make sure, because I know that as I was going through, I didn't build the case like an attorney would. I just kind of spit it out and then went on to the next thing. So by you pointing these numbers out, if you allow me to, let me just add to that. I'll stay focused on that. So that Wuhan thing that you said, it was man-made, but what's interesting is that the money was then, once the government passed a moratorium on chimeric research, that they took that virus, and when I said they, it was Dr. Fauci who diverted $3.8 million of U.S. taxpayer funds and sent the funds to China, and then that's where the research continued, and it did go to Wuhan. Now, the question that I don't know the answer to, and by the way, this is all published stuff. This isn't like I'm just coming up and I had a secret, piece of information or something. This was actually published in Nature, and then they tried to, white label it by putting a disclaimer saying that we know people are using this study and this research and this publication to say that this is what happened, but that doesn't mean what happened. They were basically saying the sky is blue, and yes, we know that the sky is blue, but just because people are saying the sky is blue, you can't use this research to say the sky is blue because it's not really blue. It's green, it might be purple, it could be red, but it's not blue. So whatever they say, it's not blue. It's that type of stupidity. And on top of that, that research that was done when they made the virus, when it was in Wuhan, when it got released, whether it was actively released on purpose, intentionally, or whether it was an accidental thing, a lab error, who knows? Nobody knows that. Whether it was an actual, they say that it was a weaponized virus. I have no idea. I don't know about any of that. But the fact that it's a man-made virus, I know that, and anybody of common sense would know it. And in fact, I'll explain this one part to you that everybody already knows. You cannot patent a naturally occurring thing, right? Right. You cannot patent walnuts. You can't patent grass, you can't patent cabbage, you can't patent things that are naturally occurring. The only way you can patent something is if it has been changed or it's been created, it's been invented, it's something new. That's the whole purpose behind patent laws, to promote new discoveries. They give somebody almost like a monopoly on that technology for 19, 20 years when they first develop it. Now, if you look at the virus, at the COVID virus, I'm not talking about the vaccine, I'm not talking about the solution, I'm talking about the virus itself. There is a patent. There have been multiple patents that have been applied, but the patent was perfected and issued in November of 2019, 1 month before the first COVID case, which was in December 2019 in China. That patent was perfected in Europe, all right? And it was owned by a company called Pirbright Corporation. And you got to go through this involved, real deep research. I'm being facetious. Just Google it and you can find it. Pirbright owns a patent on COVID. And who owns Pirbright, or who controls Pirbright? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So now you've got this foundation that owns a patent on the virus that is behind this pandemic. So if it was naturally occurring, then why does somebody have a patent on it? Well, the only reason they have a patent on it is because it's not naturally occurring and it was man-made. And I mean, that's the simplest case for anybody of common sense. You can see that. Now, of course, you can go into more detail, but that's point number one, that it was man-made.
And, I know all these rabbit holes, lead to a lot of places when you look at these types of things. One of the things that you brought up that is also very disturbing as we're having these conversations is the censorship issue. And certainly we've been dealing with censorship for the stuff that we've been putting out. We just, again, they took us off of Facebook and, shut down all our accounts. And, it's par for the course. And you do have to ask the question, what are they so afraid of? There's an agenda here. And anybody who speaks against the agenda suddenly gets censored or worse. And you talk about parallels in history, and this is, when we look at the darkest times in history, that's what starts to happen. There's an agenda by people who are in control and have power. And when anything rises up or speaks against the agenda or questions the agenda, that's through force and through censorship is being squashed. So it's difficult to even get this information out so that people can get it. And then you have control of the media, which is now how, what's creating the sheeple. The people are just saying, oh, wear a mask, do this, and they're just following along, and they can't get the dissenting points of view or any differentiating points of view. So that, I think, is abundant and clear, that's out there. I also think that it's inconsistent with the definition of a pandemic that you have no change in death rates, because that's what we see going on. And the death rates are not different.
In fact, that's a really good point, because if you have the diagnosis numbers going up higher and higher, the death rate's the same, it shows you how insignificant it really is. Because if the numbers of infections are going up, but the death rate's the same, it's not an important thing. If the infection rate's going up and the death rate's going up, then you can correlate, okay, wait a second, there's something going on. But when the death rate is the same and the numbers are going up, it shows you that it's actually getting more and more evident that it's less and less significant. That's what those numbers actually show. But again, people forget that 1 + 1 is 2. They're coming up with some kind of a strange, and it's all media. The media is propaganda. They're saying the same channels, they're repeating the same thing in different countries, same words. It's just absurd.
Yeah, so and it's absurd, and the thing that they can't hide from is reference points like Sweden, which never shut down, never masked, never social distance. They went on business as usual right through the whole COVID shutdown. Sweden said, we're not doing any of that. That doesn't make any sense. And if you look at the death rates in Sweden for the last 6 years, I reviewed them this morning, they're exactly pretty much the same year by year. There's no spike in 2020. They never shut down. They never quarantined. They never did. And they said it's ridiculous to quarantine healthy people. That makes no sense. So as we're talking about...
I was going to say that actually you can talk about Sweden. Look at the U.S. numbers. The U.S. numbers for COVID compared to the 2018 flu season. The 2018 flu season killed far more people than the COVID did. And that's with the diagnosis of these deaths by attributing suicides and heart attacks and motor vehicle accidents and cancer and people that are in hospice with terminal conditions, and then they die and they put them down as COVID. That's even with that misinformation. 2018 flu season killed more people than the COVID thing. So it's just lies upon lies upon lies.
Yeah, and it's completely misrepresented, in that way, because as you're seeing COVID, increase in COVID cases, we're seeing a decrease in flu. So they're just substituting data. I think they're manipulating the presentation of data, and you can make anything look however you want with statistics if you have an agenda to do so, as compared to saying what really can we cull out of this raw data and understand. So this all leads us up to now this subject. So just basically saying the origins of COVID-19 very suspect. The what's being reported, there's no doubt just misinformation. It is indisputable that there's an extraordinary amount of censorship around it all, which is got to make you question why would they feel a need to protect the public good. And when you see book burning for the public good, you start to recognize what's really going on if you look at history. Now we lead up to warp speed vaccines. And so now we're in this window. We're saying, hey, these vaccines now have gone through human trials. They are ready for dissemination. And because, basically it is, hey, everybody go hide in a cave. And when the vaccine's ready, come out, get the vaccine, and we'll be through this. That's the basic story that they're peddling out there. What are your thoughts around these varying vaccines? Are they... Can they possibly have assessed the safety of these vaccines at this point? Could they possibly have assessed efficacy of these vaccines at this point? What are your thoughts?
Well, this is from the acting head of the CDC made a comment about the vaccine and saying that just because you get the vaccine doesn't mean that you're not susceptible. All right. They basically said I was trying to find the quote, but the acting head of the CDC said that if you get the vaccine, it doesn't mean that you can't get the virus. And this is from Vin Gupta. Just because you get vaccinated after the second dose does not mean that you should be traveling. You could still get infected and pass it along to others. So he's a doctor, I think, out in Massachusetts. Now, my question is, okay, so you get a vaccine. They're doing propaganda studies right now to see how to convince people to come to get the second vaccine because there's so many people that are having adverse effects from the first vaccine. So they have to come up with how to manipulate or how to convince people to come get the second vaccine. And then you're being told, even after the second vaccine, that, hey, you can still get it and you still need to wear your mask. So my question is, what the hell do you need the vaccine for in the first place? Okay, if the masks work, I have come down. I travel quite frequently, and I've dealt with this on a personal level. So I've got these standard lines now when people say something about a mask. They'll start saying, I can't believe you're wearing a mask. Why aren't you wearing a mask? So my question is, are you a doctor? No? Then shut the hell up, because I am one, and there's no validity to the mask. That's just when I get really frustrated, okay? For a common person, if you're standing there and somebody comes up and says something to you about a mask, you ask them, do you think the mask works? Of course it works. Then why are you worried about me not wearing a mask? You got your damn mask on. This is like almost saying, hey, put your seatbelt on because you need to be considerate, because if you're not wearing your seatbelt, I can get hurt in a car accident. What? So
what would you say to the people saying the mask is not for you, it's to protect other people from you? Meaning if you were to cough or sneeze, it holds it in so it protects them.
First of all, if this is assuming that somebody's walking around and is infectious, you're not going to be infectious if you don't have any symptomology. They've already said that. Even the CDC's come out and said there's zero chance of transmitting this virus if you have no symptoms. In fact, that's the whole process of the infectious disease. In fact, the premise behind infectious disease is a person gets a symptom and then they become infectious. If you're not symptomatic, then you're not infectious. And they've already said, they try to say that, COVID's different, but they've already proven that that's not the case, all right? So if you don't have symptoms, then you can't give it to somebody else. But if the whole thing is, wear your mask to be courteous to somebody else so that you don't spread it to somebody else, Well, here's the thing. If the mask is enough to keep it in me, assuming that I have it, then if you're wearing your damn mask, you're protected too.
Right.
What does that have to do with me wearing a mask? All right. My mask is supposed to be good enough to protect you. Then guess what? You've got your own mask on. You've got your shield. What are you worried about? It's just like almost saying there was a really, really powerful, graphic, but powerful meme that a friend of mine sent me from Canada. So I'll describe it, and I apologize beforehand about the vulgarness of it. It's not that vulgar, but it's that if 0.04% of the people crapped on themselves, meaning defecated on themselves, would that necessitate the rest of the 99.96% of the population to wear diapers? And that's exactly what they're trying to make us believe.
It's almost an incomprehensible thing when you start to consider that these vaccines have been fast-tracked in an unprecedented way. We already know that prior vaccines carried all kinds of safety and efficacy issues that we've revealed over time with our varying series. It's almost incomprehensible that, number one, they think that they can produce a vaccine, because it's true, right, that they've been trying to create a coronavirus vaccine for many years, maybe even a decade or more, unsuccessfully. Suddenly they figured it out, and that the design of the studies don't even really demonstrate that this is going to help prevent the disease, to your point earlier, saying, just because you had your second dose doesn't mean that you're safe to go out or that you can't get the disease. So it just seems like there's no logic to any of it, yet there's certainly high risk. So it doesn't seem, the benefits, I think, are not demonstrated at all. The risks, I think, are extraordinary. And then once you let this genie out of the bottle, can it really be put back in? I think it's too late at that point.
You're right. I completely 100% agree with you.
So let me just tie up and say that, number one, I appreciate the fact that you'll speak out about this so unabashedly, because it's a little easier for me where I'm not practicing anymore, but you're still practicing with a medical license every single day, and you have that regulatory circumstance around you. Most people are afraid because they're worried about their license. You show no such fear, because I believe that you value the truth above all else, and that's what matters here. So thank you for taking a stand.
Thank you for that. I've had 9 complaints from the medical board. I just actually responded to the last one this past Monday. And so, yeah, it's interesting, but I've also been involved with many, many skirmishes with the medical boards over the last 20 years, practically every year. So I think they're used to me. So they just, as my attorney said, he said, you're like the Rocky. You've been hit so many times, you're still standing. They're just gotten tired of hitting you, so they're just moving on to somebody that can take a beating easier. So, but yeah, it is. The thing is that the consequence for us to sit back right now is, I have children, so I'm concerned about their future. But it's actually even bigger than that. It's the future of mankind. I mean, we're talking about changing the literal genetic code of the human genome. If this, RNA vaccine is introduced, it's going to rewrite the genetic code. What makes us human will no longer be there. It will not be the same signature. Because once this messenger RNA vaccine is in there, it's rewriting. That's what RNA does. It rewrites and repairs DNA. So it's going to go into our systems, and there's never been an RNA vaccine like this ever introduced into humans before.
That's the genie that once you let it out, it's not like you say, oh, we've made a mistake. You can't take it back. And to your point, in the end, one has to wonder, is this intentional? Is this stupidity? Is it a combination of both? I think propaganda is the right word, and censorship, propaganda, agenda, it all seems to be, it's like a perfect storm of the most chilling circumstance I think we'll see in our lifetime. So Dr. Buttar, as always, so much appreciate you taking the time with us. I know how busy you are, and also just for the work you're doing in general. It's really important that you do what you do in the world, because without people like you, I shudder to think where we might be.
Thank you, Dr. Gentempo. I appreciate that.
That's it for my interview with Dr. Rashid Buttar. boy, am I glad people like him are in the world, willing to stand up, speak out, fight whatever the forces are that are against truth, against free speech, against thinking differently, and continue to go at it every single day like he does. The man, in my mind, is unstoppable, and I was really happy to be able to share this with you. That concludes episode 7 of our 9-part series, Vaccines Revealed COVID Edition. We have covered a lot of ground, 7 full episodes already with bonus content. So yeah, there's a lot there, but we still have a ways to go. So don't stop now. You've taken the ride. You are more informed than probably 99.9% of the populace right now, but there's still more information to get. And I'm pretty sure right now that you've realized that it's going to be important to revisit this information. I personally want to revisit this information, and I did these interviews. So I'm going to encourage you to support our mission. I'm going to encourage you to own this series. It's very affordable. There's great bonuses. Just click the link, check out which one's right for you, invest in it, revisit this, and know that you have our sincere thanks for helping to support the work that we're doing. I look forward to seeing you on the inside of episode 8.
I'm a lab worker. It was clear, chapter 7 of our first book, you cough it on people, but you don't cough it on people if you're not sick. Please don't yourself be an experimental guinea pig. The worst thing you could do is put on a mask or get any kind of shot. And the data bear that out because you don't activate the immune system. You let your immune system clear the pathogen the way God intended. Do not let them inject you. Do not put on a mask, and we'll realize a health like this country and world hasn't seen, just like Sweden, just like Thailand.
You don't even have to really sell it, because then you've got the government and the healthcare system all pushing it for you. All you got to do is keep other treatment options out of the way, keep people in fear, and keep telling them that this is the only answer. And when you finally get it approved for emergency use by the FDA, well, then millions of people will be lined up at the pharmacy to get it. The projected death totals of 2020 are in line with the total deaths every year. So there aren't any excess deaths. So without any excess deaths, how can we act like there's actually a medical pandemic?